In this lesson, I'm going to allow you to actually kill the enemies. The player bullets will collide with the enemies and they will damage them. As I've mentioned before, Phaser comes with damaging and health functionality for sprites, so we're just going to tap onto that and use that to make our life easier. Also, we're going to extend this to see what else we can add to this process. So, the first thing I want to do is move from having a single enemy to actually working with a group of enemies. I'm going to create a method called initEnemies where we will initiate a group for our enemies. So I'm going to grab all this code and cut it, basically take it with me and create this new method, initEnemies, and I will create this new group. It will be called enemies. This.game.add this.add.group will add a new empty group, and we want to enable physics on this group. So I will enable body equals true. I'm going to add an enemy to this group, so I'm going to reuse that code that I cut previously. I'm going to be adding this single enemy. Instead of adding it to the game now, it gets added to the group. And we are going to still set that element's velocity. So far it should be looking the same unless we have an error, which it seems we do, and it's because this is not add existing, but it should just be add. So now we should have our enemy moving just like before, because we haven't really changed anything except for creating this new group. Okay, I want to check for overlapping between this group of enemies and the player bullets. So I'm going to add something to the update method of my state. It will be this.game.physics.arcade.overlap. So we're going to check for overlapping between the player bullets and the enemies. What happens when they overlap each other? We're going to call a method called damage enemy. Also, we're adding two more parameters in here. The first parameter, we're just going to leave it to null because we really want to add the second parameter, which is the context. So let me expand a little bit on this. This second parameter is the context. So there shouldn't be a question about that. It's a context so that I can access this inside of damage enemy. What about this one? Well, it turns out that you can assume that you don't want to trigger this all the time, so you can run you can enter another method. It's called the process callback, and it will run some other conditions, and if that one returns true, only then this one is called. But we're not using that in this example, which the only reason why we're entering this is because we want to add the context. Okay, so let's add damage enemy. Damage enemy will be a function, and the first parameter is going to be the bullet. The second parameter, the enemy. What is going to happen to the enemy? The enemy is going to get damaged. Sprites have a method called damage, which you can use. You enter an amount of health that's to be removed from the enemy. Remember that enemies already have health, that we've entered that in our enemy.js file, and we give it the health. So going back to the file, we're going to enter a damage of 1. So each bullet is going to take 1 energy. Then what happens to the bullet? We want to kill it. So let's have a go, see if this works. That there's no notice was that there's a bug in the current version of Phaser that I'm using, in which an element that has the physics enabled, if it already had it enabled and then we enable the group, it's not working. It should normally work. So I'm just going to comment this out, because in any case you don't need to define both times the same thing. So if we're saying that the group has physics enabled, we don't need to specify that for individual elements. So now that I've removed that condition, it actually works. So you can see the bullets are destroyed, and once we hit it 10 times, we remove the health of 10 that we had given this enemy, it dies. What if we want to do something more fancy when it dies? Inside of enemy.js, we actually can do that. So we can play the animation. Every time the player is hit, the enemy is hit, we can play an animation. So I'm going to show you how you can do that. spacehipster.enemy.prototype.damage. Every time that the damage method is called, the first thing I want to happen is that the parent method is called, so that the sprite function is called. So we're going to do the same thing that we did in this part. When we call the parent a function, we're going to do that, but instead of but it's going to be for damage. So it's going to be phaser.sprite.prototype. Damage is in the prototype. Damage.call. And then we give it the context and we give it the amount. How much is the damage? So the amount should actually be a parameter here, because damage has that method as a parameter. So this doesn't do absolutely anything. All we're saying is just call this, when we call damage on an enemy object, all you have to do is call damage on the actual parent functionality. But here's the new thing. So we also want other things to happen. And the other thing that will happen is to play an animation. The animation get hit that we've already defined up in here. So let's take a look now, and you'll see an animated enemy once it gets hit. So see how every time that you hit it, it's playing the animation until we kill it. Later on, we will add here an explosion, so that when you actually kill it, there will be a particle explosion. But we want that in this video. So I'm going to close this and summarize what we've done. We are checking for collision between the list of the player bullets and the enemies. When that occurs, we damage our enemy and we destroy the bullet. We kill the bullet so that it can be marked as dead and it can be reused in our pool of bullet objects. Now, what happens when you damage a sprite? All it happens is that it removes a number of health, and when it reaches 0, the sprite is killed. But as you just saw, we can actually have our own damage function in our custom object by doing this. The first thing we need to do is call the sprite one, because we still want to use the same thing. We still want to remove the health. We still want the sprite to die if it reaches 0. But we might want to do other cool things, such as showing animations or having something else happening in the game.